Today we are very fortunate to have medical doctor David Allen with us. He is a graduate of UCLA Medical School and has been in practice for over 30 years. He's a pioneering figure in alternative integrative medicine and was the founder of one of the first alternative medical facilities in the United States. He's currently in private practice at the Center for Optimum Health in Los Angeles. Dr. Allen combines the best of traditional Western medicine with alternative healing modalities such as acupuncture, diet and nutritional supplementation, IV immune therapy, and chelation therapies for heavy metal detoxification, among others. He's especially known for his treatment of hard-to-diagnose illnesses, including chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, environmental illnesses, digestive disorders, and ADHD autism. Welcome, Dr. David Allen.
It's an honor to be here today, and it's an honor to share the platform up here with two distinguished physicians. My practice is not fundamentally treating autism. I started treating autism years ago. In fact, one of my long-term patients was Deborah Merlin, who's up here with her sons. Autism has always been interesting to me because if you look up in the DMS-4, it basically describes autism as impaired social interaction, delayed disorders communication, markedly restricted repertoire of activities and interests. But when I first read that, I noticed that that was sort of a behavioral diagnosis. It really didn't deal with the underlying biochemistry or the biology. And Martha Herbert discussed autism as, is it a brain disorder or is it a disorder that affects the brain? So when I've explored treating any type of neurological condition, including autism and Asperger's, I like to use what I call a functional medical model. A functional medical model means that we look into different aspects of the person that could be contributing to a specific diagnosis. So for instance, we know that in autism, the patients suffer from a variety of things. First of all, they have mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondria are the organelles that sit inside of the cells of our body that make energy. And there have been studies showing that their ability to make energy is disrupted. There's also issues around what we call biotransformation and detoxification. Their ability to turn substances from A to B to C so they can be eliminated from the body seem to be impaired, and the ability to detoxify chemicals, heavy metals, etc. There are neurotransmitter issues. Neurotransmitters are how one nerve communicates with another nerve. There can be hormonal issues. So I look at this as more of a biological illness that has a genetic, certainly, component to it, but how those genes express themselves depends a lot on the environment and what they're exposed to. So we can have a gene that's highly associated with autism, but we can also have environmental triggers that are highly associated with autism also. A lot of times we think of autism as a brain that's more irritable, excitable, increased sensitivity to sound, light, touch, seizure disorders. And we know that there's certain chemicals that affect calcium channels in the body. When calcium channels are affected, the brain is more excitable. So we know that there's chemicals as well as genes that do this. So they combine them together, we have a hyperactive brain. Also there's GABA receptors, GABA that tends to calm the brain down. Certain pesticides are inhibitory to that. So you might have a genetic predisposition to have low GABA, but then when you add the pesticides on top of it, you get the typical pattern found in autism. It's so interesting because when I first learned about autism, we thought of it as sort of a static encephalopathy. Prenatal, fixed, genetic, unchangeable, and hopeless. And then I heard about some kids that get a fever. And when they get a fever, interesting, their autism can get better. So I thought, well, that's not quite as fixed as might have been thought. If you can get a fever and have a great increase in function in some kids, what are the other things that you can do to improve function? Instead of thinking of it as it happens like early on, prenatal, or the first few years of life, and then things are pretty stuck, that this may be an ongoing process. It's a process where that inflammation, everything continues. So when we see someone with autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinsonism, we begin to put them into this functional medical matrix. We think of, let's make sure we look in all of these different areas. Let's look into their diet. Let's look into their home situation. Let's look into their nutrition. Let's look at their gut, intestinal permeability, food allergies, increased inflammation based on the gut. We want to look at the inflammation in general. We want to look at autoimmunity. We want to look at their energy production, their mitochondrial function. What can we do to make the mitochondrial function better? We want to look at energy production and oxidative stress. How are they producing energy? We also want to look at detoxification. Do they have heavy metals? Do they have pesticides? How can we affect that? One of the ways that we tend to screen for heavy metals is we do a hair sample. And hair sample is one of the best screening tools. It's not a definitive tool, but it's a screening tool. When I was at UCLA Medical School in the 70s, if you looked at the blood lead levels that were acceptable, at that time it was 40 micrograms per deciliter. If we were below that, you're okay. A few years later, it went to 30, then it went to 20, then it went to 10. And a few years back, I looked at saw this article that said if you have greater than 1% in your blood, that can impair cognitive function. So as the previous panel said, these heavy metals are very, very important. Now the interesting thing is if I took lead and injected it into your vein today, you're going to have an elevated blood level for 3 or 4 months, but over time, that blood level without a continued exposure is going to go down. And when it goes down, the blood is not going to be as good as some other ways in which we look at heavy metals. So it goes out of the blood into the tissues. It may be layered into the bones, and so it could be a long-term process of detoxification. So I think this issue that's bigger than the individual or the family. It has to be brought out into the community and to the world in general, because studies have shown that areas that have higher levels of exposure to these pesticides in agricultural communities are places that are closer to coal-burning plants that secrete, that put mercury into the environment, have higher levels, not only autism, but poor health in general. So we need to bring this out and make it more of a global issue where we can clean up the environment so we actually have a healthy environment in which we can be healthy within. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much.